Good? Yeah, inshallah. Yeah? Inshallah. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Alhamdulillah. Sweden. Alhamdulillah. Praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a blessing to be here. It's always nice to come to Glasgow, see the muhibbeen, the people that we love, especially Abdul Wadud, the slave of the all-loving, mashallah. And just to come to this place as well, this blessed project, which is doing so much great work. And before I start, I always try and if we can just pause for a minute and just take a breath and just reflect and try and bring our intentions to our hearts. This is every gathering, every lesson, every class we attend is an opportunity to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But we need to be so mindful of that and conscious of that. And the more we so just pause for a moment, inshallah, and just focus our hearts on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the potential that this gathering has, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. Let's say that together, inshallah. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. It's always good to begin in the name of Allah, praising Allah, Lord of the worlds, and then asking Him to bestow His blessings upon the Prophet Muhammad, our Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So inshallah, this is a 3-session series. The idea is to focus on the heart and to hopefully almost condense and make accessible a part of an area of knowledge which is vast and which is unending really, but try and make it accessible and make it practical as well, inshallah. Hopefully we can all take something from this. There'll be the first session is kind of defining what we're going to talk about and the kind of the science, if you like, and what it applies to. The second session will be inshallah on kind of the cleaning and cleansing the heart and what that entails, and then the third will be the dealing with the beautification of the heart, or what do we want our hearts to be filled with, and what states do we want to be in, inshallah. And I know some people here attended last last Sunday, so you should all be everything. This is Shaykh Rizwan's talking on a very high level, and that text was an extremely complex text, and he managed to break it down in a way that was amazing. But inshallah, it was a good. There'll be lots of connections that we'll make with that, inshallah. So perhaps a good place to start is just kind of defining what are we talking about, and a good place to begin is the famous hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam. Everything we talk about in this science is there's lots of misconceptions, and there's lots of misunderstandings and sort of debates around this topic of quote unquote spirituality. It's always important to emphasize, to ground it in the Quran and the Sunnah. And the first hadith, or the foundational hadith, is a hadith of Jibreel alayhi salam, where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam comes the Jibreel comes and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asks the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, everyone I'm sure has heard the hadith, and there's these 3 dimensions of the religion. The 3 dimensions, which are, what are the 3 dimensions? Islam, Well done, mashallah. Islam, Iman, and Ihsan. So we all familiar with Islam and Iman, and we talk about them a lot, and we're constantly, engaging in these things. But perhaps the level of the Ihsan is perhaps not talked about so much. Perhaps it's not the topic of the Friday khutbah. Perhaps it's not your everyday kind of conversation, because it is something high, and it's something perhaps it might seem unattainable. It might seem something which is almost like, who are we to kind of talk about these things? But what was the definition of the Prophet ﷺ for ihsan? MashaAllah. Even in the words of the Prophet ﷺ, to worship Allah as though you see Him. Okay, to worship Allah as though you see Him. And if you do not see Him, then truly He sees you. Okay. And this is obviously a high station, to be in a state of mushahada, witnessing Allah, worshipping Allah, and that's not just some kind of not just a ritual that we go through, but actually in a state of who am I actually worshipping? What am I doing in this? Witnessing that you're worshiping, you're visualizing or interacting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if not, then at least you're conscious that He's constantly seeing us. He's constantly we're constantly in that state of vigilance, awareness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's a big ask to be in that state constantly. But this is what ihsan. This is the definition of ihsan. So what do we call this science or this branch of knowledge that we're talking about? We can call it ihsan. Okay. What else do we call it? What other names do we give to it? Tazkiyah. That's a popular one. And tasawwuf, tasawwuf, Sufism, tasawwuf. These are usually the names that are given to it. Often with the Islamic sciences, the names weren't necessarily used in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, so that always causes, why are you doing something that the Prophet ﷺ didn't do? But they didn't have fiqh as we know it today. Didn't have all the sciences of language. The Sahaba didn't sit down and have a dars of nahu, of like nahu and sarf, of what we call grammar and morphology, or these names that they came later. But it's natural that, or it happened naturally that sciences were codified and a system was evolved, and even the idea of systematically studying knowledge only came later, madrasas and curriculum. And so, like, the way, if you look how the Prophet ﷺ taught, it was very organic. It wasn't like, today we're going to do the dars on fiqh, we're going to go through the rules and then tomorrow we're going to talk about aqidah. It was everything the Prophet ﷺ taught was on all, and it was on every level. The illiterate Bedouin could understand what the Prophet ﷺ was saying, and the people who the elect Sahaba the Prophet ﷺ was teaching also could understand it and had different levels of understanding. And he was literally, revelation was coming down, and the Sahaba were interacting with that revelation, and they were seeing signs. And the Prophet ﷺ was just said, "Oh, an angel has just come to me and told me this, and this thing has just happened." And it was just immersive learning experience. There was no distinction between what subject or what topic. It's just and that's when we come back to the seerah and the hadith, and we really see that. But for purposes of our discussion, we have to kind of have some focus today on this science that we're calling. You want to call it tasawwuf, you want to call it Sufism, or Tazkiyah, you want to call it ihsan, you want to call it knowledge of the heart, whatever you want to call it. It's part of was part of the Islamic tradition, and it has just like you can trace the development of fiqh, how fiqh developed, and the different Sahaba went to different places. Ibn Mas'ud went to Kufa, and a school started arising, which eventually becomes a Hanafi school, and then other scholars went to Syria, and Imam Shafi, and all these things. That was, you can study the development of fiqh, and then you can look at the science of aqidah, how things evolved, often as a result of challenges, like theological challenges that came about. We need to theologically answer these questions. Likewise with tasawwuf, with tazkiyah, with ihsan, there was a transmission that took place, and it wasn't necessarily formally taught, but it was lived. It was lived and it was transmitted from the Sahaba to the Tabi'een, and then to the Tabi'een, and then we have almost the schools arising, just like schools of fiqh, you know. And if you look at the biographies of the great scholars in our tradition, they will follow a school of law. One of the eventually ended up being four madhahib. You'll find the great scholars followed one of those schools, and they follow one of the two, generally the two schools of Aqidah, the school of Imam Maturidi and the school of Imam Al-Ashari. And then they would usually have a path that they followed, or a school or a methodology they followed in tasawwuf, in tazkiyah. That was the norm. That you'd have someone that a scholar or a sheikh that they followed in that area. And that will become clear why they did that in a minute, inshallah. It's always good to define something at the beginning. How do we define this knowledge or this science or this area of knowledge? Can anyone remember what the definition from last Sunday was? Imam al-Zarruq. Anyone?
A beautiful topic.
It was yes, exactly. Well, however you want to translate it. Basically, sidq at-tawajjuh ila Allah, which means however you want to translate it, sidq, sincere in inner direction towards Allah. Sidq at-tawajjuh ila Allah. In other words, turning yourself truthfully and sincerely to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a beautiful definition that is. Very, very simple, but very obviously very deep, and it just sums up everything. If you have that sincere turning to Allah, then you're on some kind of path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very inclusive. It's very sometimes Sufism, quote unquote, can be quite exclusive. If you're not part of this, or you haven't got bay'ah with this, or it can be quite you're not part of the club. But anyone who has sidq at-tawajjuh ila Allah has some kind of element of this turning of this. So another simple definition would be just total dedication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Total dedication to Allah. Okay. And then a more sort of comprehensive, if you like, detailed definition. Ibn Ajiba was a Moroccan scholar who did a lot to clarify and explain the path. He says it's a science, it's a knowledge, it's a type of knowledge through which one can know how to travel into the presence of the divine. Okay, there's always this metaphor of traveling the path, traveling, sayr, sometimes called sayr, tariqa. All these words, Arabic has numerous words for path and traveling, sirat and tariq and suruk, and but there's no physical traveling taking place at all. You can sit in one place and be on a journey traveling to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what does it mean to travel into the presence of the divine? How do you really explain that? But purify one's inner self from filth and beautify it with a variety of praiseworthy traits. Okay, so this idea of traveling, getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the idea of purification, and the idea of beautification, and that's how we'll be kind of breaking this down in the second and third session. What's called tazkiyah or takhliyah and tahliya. You get rid of the blameworthy traits and you replace them with praiseworthy traits. Okay. So that's. But if you just stick with that first definition, think about sidq at-tawajjuh. If you ask Allah, if you made your dua every day, Allah, give me sidq at-tawajjuh, give me sincere turning to you, give me sincere inner direction towards you. That would be a good thing to ask for, inshallah. And all of this is timely because we're preparing for Ramadan. This is all good stuff. This is all important things to be talking about. Checking our hearts, checking, as we prepare to receive the blessings of Ramadan. It's good to have these conversations. Inshallah. So why is it so important? Why is this science so crucial? Why have you come today? Why do you regard it as being something important? Why have you given up your Saturday afternoon or evening for this? What's the reason? You haven't been forced to come.
I think it means you become so busy in your routines, you can miss the simple points.
Yeah.
I think you need to be reminded of very straightforward things that are in front of you. You're not seeing them.
Absolutely.
You're so busy engrossed in the complicated.
Yeah.
You miss the
reminder. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, what else? Why is it so important? Or is it not important? Which means? Yeah. Sound heart, the importance of having a sound heart, coming to Allah with a sound heart. Anything else? Yeah. Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, beautiful, yeah. The perfecting of one's character, becoming a true human being. So, I mean, like you said, success and salvation are dependent upon the state of the heart. This is what the scholars of this science are always emphasizing, that this is there's a level of fear that we can build mountains of good works and do wonderful things and build mosques and give charity and worship, worship all night, but there's all of that can come to nothing if we're not careful of our hearts and building the correct foundations. The body will perish. Bodies are already, as you get older, your body's already decaying. It's already losing you're losing your faculties. But that's, the body is turab and will return to turab. The body's from earth and it will return to earth. But what lives on forever that's what dictates your situation, your state in the next life. So the state of your heart has everlasting consequences. And the famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that he said it so powerfully. In the body, there's a lump of flesh. If it is healthy, the whole body is healthy, and if it's sick, the whole body is sick. And why is this? Why did Imam Nawawi put this in the 40 hadith of all the hadith, thousands of hadith? Because it's just, we have to be constantly reminded of that fact. It's in Bukhari and Muslim as well. And what you mentioned, that the day when neither wealth nor children will be of any benefit. So, and the only one who will be saved is the one who comes before God with a sound heart. Qalbun salim. Qalbun salim. Okay. So all the things that we attach value to and kind of amass, and things that we have in this life, none of it will benefit us if we haven't done the work, the heart work, the work on the heart. Qalbun salim. Use the word salim, which is sound, healthy, free from blemishes, free from faults, free from sickness. And in the hadith, the word used was salah. إذا صلح القلب. And then this idea of, how do we define success? What do we regard as success? Someone, she's a real success story. She came out of a difficult situation and she achieved this, and this guy was a real, the people that we hold up being on the criteria we have for success. It's often very limited. It's very limited. It relates to worldly career and status, and those things they're not. We don't dismiss them. They still have their importance, even in Islamically. But when we think of success, of falah, when Allah says, who are the successful people? Who are those people? What are those qualities? And this is one of the things that We're gonna read the Quran in Ramadan, inshallah. We're gonna hear the Quran in Ramadan. These are things to pick up on. Who are the people that Allah loves? Who are the people that Allah says are successful? And really kind of hone in on these things. And who are the people that Allah says aren't successful? Who are the people in loss? Who are the people who are not beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? He doesn't say he hates people. He just says, Inna Allah la yuhibbu. Allah doesn't love you. These are things to really think about and pick up. And if we don't, yeah.
You're referring to قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا, right?
Yes. You're jumping ahead. It's right here. This is a Surah Al-Shams, which I'm sure even the young ones know, where Allah swears a series of oaths. Incredible. Just to have the build up. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. It's so beautiful. وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا. Allah swears by the sun and this beautiful brightness that comes in the morning. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَغْشَاهَا وَالنَّهَارِ إِذَا جَلَّاهَا وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالشَّمْسِ وَالْقَمَرِ إِذَا تَلَّاهَا. And the moon, Allah swears by the sun and the moon, by the day and the night, by the heavens and the earth. You see the pairs, all things which have an impact on us. They're part of our world and our surroundings. The sun and the moon impact us, and the heavens and the earth, and the night and the day. وَالنَّفْسِ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا. Allah swears by the human soul, the human nafs, and we'll talk more about these things. But all these things have an impact, but also the human soul has a huge impact on what goes on in everything. In fact, that happens in the earth is, in a sense, or not everything, but it has a huge impact on just the individual soul has an impact. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا. Every soul has that choice of good and evil, rebellion and piety, taking which path it takes. So and then Allah comes to the having sworn by all those things. He comes to what's called jawab al-qasam, the thing that he's swearing by, that قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. This is so fundamental and so important. The one who purifies his soul has succeeded. If you've managed to purify your nafs, you have succeeded in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regardless of whether you are wherever you are in society, or how much you've quote unquote achieved, or how many qualifications you have, and if you've managed to purify your soul, you're people of success. Even if no one else regards you as someone of success, even no one who knows who you are. Okay, but if you وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. But if you corrupted your soul, if you've covered up your soul and failed to go through any kind of process of purification, then that's failure in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the stakes are very high. The stakes are very serious. And the whole Quran these are the themes that the whole Quran is revolving around. Purification, success. And then also it's the essence of the message, the mission of the Prophet ﷺ. When Allah describes the mission of the Prophet ﷺ in different verses, you see a combination of these different things. Allah has truly blessed the believers, for He has sent them a messenger from among them, who recites His signs to them and purifies them. Okay, the idea of Tazkiyah is there in the mission of the Prophet ﷺ. He was sent to recite the Quran to us, teach us the revelation, but also to purify us. Allah uses that word. وَيُزَكِّيهِمْ وَيُعَلِّمُهُمُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةِ. So He comes as a muzakki, as a mu'allim, as a teacher, as a educator, as a guide, as a reciter, but as a purifier. He comes to purify us. That's in the essence of His teachings. Everything in his teaching, or His teaching revolves around these things. Okay. Of course, even if Allah hadn't said that there's already purification in the book, in the wisdom. But Allah wants to emphasize that the concept of purification and the different levels of that entails. And the Prophet himself made that. He taught us the importance of this. His du'as, his request. For example, he said, and it's connected to that verse that we just looked at. Allahumma ati nufusana taqwaha وَزَّكِيهَا أَنْتَ خَيْرٌ مِنْ زَكَاهَا أَنْتَ وَلِيُّهَا وَمَوْلَاهَا. Beautiful dua of the Prophet ﷺ. We should also learn. Allah, give our souls taqwa, give our souls taqwa and purify them. Okay, zakiha. So the Prophet was teaching us to ask for this purification. Anta khayrun man zaka anta waliha mawlaha. You're the best of those. Or you alone may purify them. You're the Lord, and you're their Lord and Master. Okay. So that's just getting an idea of how great this science is, and how important this science is, and how significant it is, and how it's the essence. It's the essence of everything the Prophet ﷺ taught, and everything that he taught was infused with this purification, of this, and how the inward and the outward are always interconnected in Islam. There's outward practices that we do. It never stops. It's never just the outward practice. It's never just something like wudu. Okay, it's never just about the outward washing, the outward rules. Though we have to have that, but there's always something deeper than that it's pointing to. There's always something deeper than that I'm pointing to. It's important when we teach Islam to our children, or when someone new to Islam, we don't never just stop at the outward. Never just always try and point that there's more to this than just that. There's more to it than just the basic and the apparent meaning. It's always pointing to something else. And even the Sharia itself. The Deen means a path. It's another word for Sharia. Is another one that means for path. It's not a means in and of itself. It's leading to something else. It's a vehicle that's taking you somewhere else. So now, if we just look at, we're going to look at kind of the makeup of the human being. So we start with the external, the outward, the body. We are human beings. We are. Allah has ennobled us. We created man in the most beautiful stature. Allah has, created Adam in the most beautiful form, and ennobled the children of Adam. So even just from a physical point of view, we have this amazing, body that Allah has given us. We could be like any kind of. We could have to walk on our stomachs and walk on all fours, and but even how we walk and how we eat. Cats have to kind of go down and literally almost bow down to the food to eat it. We can raise the food up to our mouths to eat it. We're like this kind of juncture between the heavens and the earth. We walk on the ground, but our head is raised. We're connected to the heavens. We're this kind of. So even on a physical level, we're very we're blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Although physically we're not as strong as many types of animals. We don't have as strong a sight as an eagle, or the sense of smell that a dog has, for example. We don't have, our senses are limited, but we have this beautiful stature. Ahsani taqweem, as Allah says. And then we come to but that's just the external. Okay, the external. And then we come to the internal elements of the human being. And we want to just talk about these each briefly. What makes us, what's our internal makeup? Okay. We have what's called the fitra. And we have this thing called the nafs, which we'll talk about. We have the intellect, we have the spirit, and we have the heart, or the qalb. And each of these are very important to understand before we, as an introduction, before we talk about, the spiritual path and so on. And there's some of these names and words are used interchangeably, which is kind of confusing. But inshallah, we'll hopefully clarify some of these things. So beginning with the fitrah, I'm sure most people are familiar with this idea of the famous hadith that every child is born in a state of fitrah. What is the fitrah? First of all, how do you define the fitrah? What do we mean by fitrah?
Natural instinct. Natural instinct,
yeah. So animals have that as well. No one teaches, a cat how to hunt. It just learns. It just has this fitrah, has its own. But what else does it entail? that makes us unique as human beings. Natural belief. Okay. Yeah.
Innate nature.
Innate nature. Yeah. Huh? Moral compass. Yeah. Yeah. So every child is born in a state of fitrah. Every child is born in a pure state, clean slate. That's ready to, that knows, recognizes, and inclines towards all that is good, beautiful, and pure. Okay. So we have this. That's how we're born, and we may or may not, as the hadith says, we may or may not retain that in state, that internal state. But every human being is born in that state to know, recognize, and incline towards all that is good and beautiful and pure. And if this is nourished, then we maintain it, and it may be almost covered over, maybe weakened, and maybe lost to some extent. But someone who's any human being, who every human being has something of this. We naturally, violence, for example, is naturally repulsive. Okay, and if you're someone that loves violence, then you've come away from the fitrah. Okay, we love things which are pure and clean, smell, for example, or just beautiful scenery, or beautiful. Any human being will appreciate this, regardless of their faith but everyone can appreciate that. Everyone has a sense of right and wrong innately. This is something. There's just something you'll feel in your heart that something's not right here. When you see injustice, or you see harm, you know deep down that it's not right, and something's internally saying no. Because of how we're raised or how we are conditioned, we lose that. You can lose it altogether. It may not have been nurtured in your childhood, but it's there somewhere. And deep down there is this, like you said, the knowledge of and a yearning for God. Okay, because that's what's imprinted on our soul, is that we have a creator, and he loves us and we love him. Again, someone may live their whole life not recognizing that fact, and not responding to that call, so to speak. But it's there somewhere. And part of the if you like, the work of da'wah is to try and remove those barriers, and try and clear up or clear back or remove some of that, the weeds or the stuff that's grown over that state of fitrah. And it's very connected to the ruh as well, the spirit, which we'll talk about in a minute as well. It's very important to understand that. And then this interesting word, the nafs. Okay, some is called the self, some is called the ego, some is called the soul, which we talk about a lot. It gets a lot of. We talk about in the kind of spiritual discussions. It gets a lot of bad press. The nafs always gets the blame for everything. But if it's yourself, if it's yourself, then yourself can't fundamentally be wrong or evil. Surely it must be something more than that. And again, this is where we kind of might get more complicated, because different hadith and different scholars have different ways of kind of approaching it. But I generally what I'm following in these sessions is what Imam Ghazali's teachings, because it's just the clarity and the way he's explained is very, and that's kind of what the tradition that I've been taught, basically. But there's not the only approach, and there's not the only way of thinking. These things are not exact and precise. We're talking about things which are hard to define and hard to be precise about. That's important. It's not concrete things we're talking about. We're talking about internal things internally, which are not always exact and easy to define. But Imam Ghazali defines the nafs as essentially the two forces. There's two internal forces which are called anger and desire. Okay, al-shahwa or al-ghadab, or al-ghadab or shahwa. Ghadab, we have these things running in us, two forces which are very strong. The force of anger and the force of desire. Okay, and this is the challenge is to basically harness them and train and use them, not to get rid of them altogether, because Allah put these things there for a reason. Okay, if you had no desire, you wouldn't have any appetite to eat, and then you would just fade away and die. But Allah put that in us, that we hunger and also anger is a defense mechanism, you know. And we'll talk more, inshallah, about that. But the idea is we're not trying to get rid of these things, we're trying to channel these things. But it's the selfish nature of it, it's concerned with gratification. The nafs is essentially about me. I want this, and I want gratification, and I want my desires to be fulfilled. That's our part of our self, you know. It's often likened to a wild animal that must be tamed, you know, like when you, in the old days, they go and catch wild horses in the prairies or whatever, and they bring them in and they break them in, you know, they train a horse, so then it becomes useful. It can take you places, and if the horse is untamed and untrained, you can't do anything with it. Okay, that's often the metaphor that's used. And our nafs is our vehicle. It's a good metaphor because it's a vehicle. We can't get rid of the nafs. It's part of us, and we have to use it to take on the journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you can't just say, I'm gonna we talk about killing the nafs. That's not really the right kind of metaphor. It's more about training and using it, and also doing deals with it, you know, giving it something in order that it has to have food. It has to you have to give something to the nafs in order for it to take you on the journey. But it's just like if the horse or the camel is taking you for a long journey, if you overfeed it, or you underfeed it, or you're constantly in this kind of back and forth with it, basically. And we're going to talk more about it in the next session as well. But an important kind of idea is that it has a lowest. Everyone's in different levels and different states according to their nafs. Someone can be in the real lowest level, which is called the nafs al-ammara bis-su'. And these are all mentioned in the Quran, these different states. So nafs al-ammara is we can call the commanding soul, or the imperious soul. All it is just demanding, and you're just obeying it and responding to it. Okay. So it wants this, and that's the kind of the times that we live in, and that we know. People know that if you want to sell something, if you want to sell a product, you appeal to that nafs al-amara. You appeal to those people's desires, and feed that and encourage that, and that'll keep the money rolling in for your product or for your. That's why if you want to sell a product, you use a half-naked woman to sell something, because it appeals to the nafs, to a man's nafs. Then if there's some kind of elevation and some kind of awakening and consciousness, then we're in this back and forth nafs al-lawama, which is reproachful. It's conscious of it's more conscious of itself, that it doesn't just obey every call and every desire. It tries to fight that and comes back, but it kind of slips up and then makes amends, and this is the nature of the struggle, this back and forth, you know. And then a higher level, or there's other definitions. Some mention seven states, but just to keep it very simple, the aim is to get to nafs al-mutma'innah, that the soul is tranquil. So it's absolutely, there's no opposition when you want to do something which is pleasing to Allah. There's no opposition. The nafs actually wants that, and so it's still the point is it's still nafs. It's still your nafs. The nafs is not always negative. It's not always used in a negative situation. It depends on where you are on the scale of self, working on yourself, basically. And again, we'll talk more, inshallah, next time. Where are we? Yeah, sorry. So the next one is what's called the aql, the intellect. Okay. This is basically what does anyone know the meaning of where the meaning of the word aql comes from? What's the kind of
Flying the camel.
Aql, yeah, iqal. You know, the Arabs, some of the Arabs wear this kind of they wear the kind of headdress, and they have this black kind of thing. You've probably seen it. That's called egal. Egal is a thing which holds the headdress in place. Okay, so the aql is to aql or iqal and naql is to hold it, is something which holds it. So your intellect is what holds you it keeps you from when you're of sound intellect. It stops you from doing terrible things. Stops you from embarrassing yourself. It stops you from saying something stupid. It stops you from doing something stupid. It stops you from making bad decisions. That's the idea. It's this idea of judgment and reason. The faculty of reason, basically, judgments and decisions. Okay, which is again a blessing that we've been given as human beings. That makes us, which distinguishes us from the other creatures. That we have that ability to make this, to look at a situation and see where's that going to take. You see beyond just the purely physical. Okay, I can see the consequence of this decision. I can weigh things up. This is what we're blessed with as human beings. And then this is so we talked about the fitra, we talked about the nafs, we talked about the aql. Now this what's called the ruh. The ruh. What is the ruh? So I'm calling the ruh spirit, and I'm calling the nafs soul. But often these are used interchangeably. Okay, sometimes we use the ruh and we mean this. We use the word soul for the ruh. Sometimes so it can be a bit confusing, and that's why it's the Arabic words kind of keep us more. They're kind of more, they allow us to distinguish. But ruh, we'll call the ruh the spirit. What do we know about the spirit? What does Allah tell us about the spirit? What do we know about the spirit? Not much. Not much. It's just very mysterious. But it is mentioned in the Quran. And this is one of the tests that when there was questions were given to the Prophet ﷺ, that one of them was asked about the ruh, and the response was that ruh min amri rabbi, that the spirit is part of my Lord's domain. It's hard to put your finger on. It's hard to define. It's hard to describe, because it's something which is beyond our physical experience. But every single human being has a ruh. Every human being has a ruh, and we're honored. Allah says in several verses that He has given us from Him. When I fashioned him and breathed my spirit into him, bow down before him. Speaking about Adam, our father Adam was given a ruh, and Allah attributes it to Himself. Okay, my spirit, ruhi. He says, I've given it. I have, and so every human being has this incredible honor of having a ruh, having this spirit, this inner life force, or this inner thing which amazingly lives, it existed before this realm, and acknowledged Allah, and lives on forever. Just think about that for a moment. In you have something which goes back way before this life that you've lived in, and it will live on forever. You have this, the part of you is like eternal, which is beyond. Again, how do we really comprehend that? But Allah tells us in the Quran that He spoke to us before we were physical bodies, and we acknowledged that His oneness, subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the famous verse in Surah Al-A'raf, when Allah says, Alastu bi rabbikum, am I not your Lord? Qalu bala shahidna. Every one of us said yes, we bear witness. Every one of us bore witness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Am I not your Lord? Yes. We all said that. And this connects to the idea that we're talking about, the idea of fitrah before, that every human being has this in them, deeply buried in them. And we took this covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? In this life, as when we surrender to Allah, the Muslim is someone that surrenders to Allah. We are acknowledging this covenant that we took in the spiritual realm. When someone accepts Islam, who wasn't born in Islam, there's a kind of acknowledgement of something deeply buried in them. Okay, they're not reverting. I don't like the word revert. they're not. It's not revert because you weren't. Aslama is an active submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you weren't actively. You're not coming back to something that you had previously. You're coming back. You're acknowledging that fitra that you had. Okay, but you're not. I don't think revert is an accurate word for what someone does to become Muslim. In a sense, every adult Muslim has acknowledged this ahd or this covenant with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I think it's a misunderstanding. The idea, using the word riba is a misunderstanding of the hadith that we just mentioned before, that every soul is born in the fitrah. But it doesn't say every child was born in Islam. It didn't say that. You're returning to something, but you're not. It's not reverting to something that you had previously. That's just my take on it. So we talked about these 5 things. Okay. We talked the fitra is not. The fitra is slightly separate, but we talked about the nafs, the heart. I'm going to mix that here. So the 5th thing is the heart or the qalb, which is almost like the battleground. For everything is focusing on this. All the other forces are kind of connecting to this, which essentially the heart has the potential to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and love Him, but the Arabic word has a meaning of taqallub, of moving. It's always being influenced. There's lots of outward influences that can affect it. It can easily be corrupted because of the outward influences. But so we talked about the nafs, the qalb, the ruh, and the aql. These 4 things, and they all have separate considerations. But what something Imam Ghazali talks about is that in their higher level, when the nafs is at the higher level, when the qalb and the ruh and the aql are at the highest level, that is essentially one thing. This is internal, subtle inner essence of the human being, which has a potential to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. In the lower sense, they're more distinct, but in the higher sense, they're all essentially talking about one thing. Okay. The nafs, the qalb, the ruh, and the aql. So the aql, every human being, Muslim has that aql, has that ability to distinguish if they're sound of mind. But in its highest level, the aql is something which relates to spiritual knowledge, really. And in Surah Al-Mulk, the people who rejected Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will deny that they had aql. They'll say, لو كنا نسمع أو نعقل ما كنا في أصحاب السعير. Had we only had listened and understood or had intellect, we would not be amongst the people of the fire. So every functioning human being has that ability to distinguish. But at the highest level, aql is what takes us to a knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I've got this diagram. It might be very hard to see, but this is actually from Islamic psychology, what we call Islamic psychology. Dr. Abdullah Rothman, he kind of put down this, or laid out this kind of way of visualizing it, if you like, based on Imam Ghazali, essentially. So you can see you have in the middle you have the heart, the body, the mind. The spirit is up there. The self. This is all the human being, basically. This we talked about all these things. Okay, the spirit, the body, the mind. Again, soul, spirit. But you get the idea. The spirit is the higher thing that that has this ability to know Allah. The heart is there in the middle. The body and the mind. We have the reproaching self, the nafs al-lawama, this is the battleground here, basically. We're trying to work on ourselves. There's also the refinement of character going on. We have these forces pulling us down, which we'll talk about again next time, inshallah. Shaitan and so on, the struggles against the lower self. And we have these upward forces. We have the evil commanding self, and we have the tranquil self. Have the spirit. So Allah is being called up to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our natural disposition is up there. He's got everything in there. You can disagree if you like of how things are placed, but you get the idea of this human being in the middle, and then this struggle going on here, and the potential to be raised, and the potential to be pulled down. Okay, and he's doing it in the context of Islamic psychology, but in reality we don't. What's psychology called in Arabic? what's it called in Arabic? Ilm al-nafs. It's called ilm al-nafs. They didn't make a distinguish. They didn't say this is a kind of branch. They didn't medicalize and sort of bracket this. They saw it always as one thing, basically. So every human being is in this kind of struggle of working on the nafs, basically working on themselves. So he's doing it in the context of trying to, if you like, work on the human being in the sense of well-being and wellness, but it applies to everything. It applies to everything. So maybe you can come back to that. This is upward pull and downward pull, and this is the struggle in the middle, which we're talking about. So what really makes us human? Having said all that, what really makes us human? What makes us human? What do you say? having talked about all these things, yeah. I mean, it's all. I mean, obviously, it's what really distinguishes us and marks us out as human beings from, of all these things we talked about. Obviously, physical is important. The physical is important, but is that really what makes us human beings? Not really, because the body doesn't last forever. But we have this internal thing, whatever you want to call it. This internal life or this internal apparatus, or there's something which is unique, and it's unique for each. It's unique to us as human beings, but everyone is unique in that. You think about that. Every single ruh, every single soul was in one place at one point. Every single soul every single spirit will ever be, from the beginning of time to the end of time. Each one is unique. Okay. And the Prophet says that some of them, in that situation, some of them came to know each other, and that sometimes explains how we feel an affinity with someone. I really click with that person. And perhaps, and someone else you feel immediately some kind of, I can't stand that person. Maybe that could have happened in the because there's things happening. We're always operating on so many different levels. Even when we're interacting with each other, often it's just at the level of the lower self. Do I fancy that person? Do I not? Or do I like that person or not? That often, but at the same time, there's things going on in us. The different souls are connecting, interacting with each other, and that's what makes us human beings. Insan, the word insan that's used in the Quran, what does it come from? Where does the word come from? To forget. One interpretation is forget, that we by nature we're sort of we're deficient and we forget. And what's another interpretation? Uns is that feeling of comfort we have. We need other human beings to live with and to be fully human. To be fully human. And that's part of the beauty of the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, is it's all this. Prophet ﷺ didn't stay in the cave and then just send down messages to his community, right? So he didn't write the Quran, and then he could have been like that. The Quran, he stays in the cave, people send him food, and he just sends down the Quran, the latest update of the Quran on a piece of paper, and everyone. It wasn't like that. He comes straight down from the cave, and he interacts with his wife, and he interacts with his waraqa, and then he interacts with so and so and so, and it's and all the people that over the 23 years that he raised and he educated, and that's what humanity is all about. So just a few things. How do we, just before we, we'll go into more depth, but this is, how do we know, what are some of the signs, or what are some of the things to think about to tell that we're spiritually healthy, or that we have a healthy heart? There's lots of things mentioned because the Prophet said, we mentioned before, Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, that the one who, if it's sound, then everything's sound, and it's interesting because even on a physical level, the heart is so physically important, the blood, and but the spiritual heart, is that healthy? And if how do we kind of measure this? How do we gauge if we're healthy or not? What are some of the signs? Anyone think of anything? We talked about the healthy heart, sound heart. What do we? how we think about others, humbleness, exactly. So that, again, this idea of human interactions, that's often how we showed up almost. We can be very pious, you can be pious, but then when you come into interaction with someone, you're driving and there's a bit of aggro, or there's someone at work that you don't really get on with, or how do you see yourself and how do you see the other person? And what else?
You have remorse and regret for certain things.
Mashallah.
Time after you do them,
Mashallah.
you'll think back, maybe after you get angry.
Yeah,
Maybe that was the best.
that's beautiful. Exactly. So having that remorse, having that reflection of like, was I out of order when I said that, or did this? And that's definitely. Anything else? Could mention a few things. Quite a lot there, but so these are two verses in one hadith. The believers, the believers are those whose hearts tremble at the remembrance of Allah. Okay, so how are we when Allah is remembered? How are we when the Quran is recited? How do we respond when someone gives us a reminder, or someone points out something to us, and who put their trust in their Lord? Look at these different qualities we have. They tremble at the remembrance of Allah. And we have many descriptions of how the Sahaba and the Tabi'een, how they were, what kind of states they got into just in reciting the book of Allah or remembering Allah. Their faith increases when His revelations are recited to them. Again, relate this to Ramadan. If we don't come out of Ramadan with an increase in Iman, when we've heard all these verses recited and recited them ourselves, and there's some disconnect, and they put their trust in their Lord. Are we people that really, because there's a difference between, again, rational, we all understand Allah is in control of everything, Allah is apportioning everything, Allah is taking care of everything, but do we actually make that, do we actually actualize that and live that reality and put our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Another beautiful dua that Allah mentions, do not allow bitterness into our hearts towards those who believe. لا تجعل في قلوبنا غلا للذين آمنوا. Allah mentions this. We shouldn't have resentment, spite, rancor, bitterness towards our fellow human beings or fellow believers. And as you said, if someone is when we do good, are we happy with that? And when we do bad, are we saddened by that? That's iman. Is iman that you're happy that you've done something good, not in a way, as we'll talk about, not in a way of which becomes pride and becomes about the self, but just alhamdulillah, Allah's given me the ability to do something which is good, and you're happy about that. That's a sign of good. That's a sign of fitrah, that not naturally inclining and loving good, and if you, as you said, you made a mistake, you slipped up, you didn't act to. You didn't live up to the what you the level or the how you should. You're not happy by that. So that's a sign of a true believer. And what's the kind of opposite? How do we know if our hearts are not so healthy or not? Obviously the flip side of everything we've mentioned, but what are kind of signs of a dead heart? Can your heart be dead? So again, it's the physical heart may be beating, but spiritually you might be dead. What are signs of a dead heart? Arrogance. Yeah. What else? Despair. Yeah. A lot of just the kind of the opposite of what we've been saying now, but and the Prophet said, the likeness of someone who remembers Allah and someone who doesn't is like the living and the dead. So someone can be, again, physically healthy, they go to the gym, they work out, their heart is, but there's no remembrance of Allah in the heart, in the spiritual sense. So they're walking around like everyone else, but they're dead. Internally, they're dead. Or there's just a very slow pulse, there's not much life in them. Someone else can be physically, can't even move, but they're in the remembrance of Allah and awareness of Allah, and they're spiritually healthy. The heart is alive, and they cry, they weep when they recite the Quran. Allah mentions this. Even then, your hearts became hardened like a rock. Hearts can be harder than rocks. Think about that. Yeah. Someone can be so hard, so harsh. They can just do terrible things and not feel any even the kind of tiny bit of remorse or pity for someone. Yeah. In fact, the rock, at least he said, Allah says, at least the rock can potentially split and water can come out through it and it can be worn down. But the heart can be so hard, it's not even that's impossible. أو أشد قسوة, even harder than a rock. It's how you look at the Quran, look at what's around us and see signs and things around us. They have hearts they do not understand with. You say Allah here connects the aql to the heart. لهم قلوب لا يعقلون بها ولا يفقهون بها. They don't understand with. So the heart, we think of understanding, we always think of understanding being up here, don't we? Always think of the mind being but Allah connects the intellect or the understanding to the heart. Eyes they do not see with, ears they do not hear with. Even though physically they might be very intelligent, they have good sense of hearing, they have a good sight, but they're not using their senses they are like cattle. Yeah. Like, in fact, they're even less guided. Such people are entirely heedless. Okay. And then to quote Ibn Ata'illah, one of the great scholars of this path, he says, a sign of the heart's death is the absence of sadness over the acts of obedience you have neglected, and the absence of regret over the mistakes you have made. Okay. That's a warning sign. So like if you missed out on some goodness or did something wrong and there's no feeling, there's no sense of remorse, there's no sense of missing something and it needs to make amends, and it's a sign of death of the heart. Okay. And of course, there's always this, the physical, the medical metaphor is if we have any physical problem, physical ailment, we rush to the emergency. We rush to the doctor because your body tells you there's pain or there's something. There's an urgency. I'm not going to wait. I'm not going to put it off till next week because the pain is so much or it's urgent. I need to get a checkup. I need to get a scan. But how do we apply that to the spiritual? How many people apply that to our spiritual life? It's urgent. I need to deal with this situation. Someone can live their whole life and have sicknesses and diseases they've never even noticed that are there, let alone gone for treatment for them. And that's a scary thought. And these could be people worshipping and doing all the good things, but there's never a sense of going for a checkup or doing something or having a scan, or just having that self-reflection. So it's nearly coming to the end, inshallah. You guys are patient. This is Ibn Ajiba mentions what causes the heart to die. He says excessive worldly attachment. Okay, we'll come to that next session, inshallah. Neglecting the remembrance of Allah, or freely committing acts of disobedience. Okay. Yeah, see, these are like poison. We're going to talk about next time the worldly attachment, but again, we have this balance of we still live in the world, but we try not to be too much of the world. If the world or our surroundings become the be all and the end all, then it's destructive. It's like it crushes the life out of us. It suffocates us. There needs to be lots of spiritual air to breathe. If the world is if your heart is so full of it, then there's not much air to breathe. And we need that spiritual air to breathe. Neglecting the remembrance of Allah. Okay, so this is fundamental to every ailment or every treatment. The remembrance of Allah is crucial. Why is the Prophet ﷺ always teaching us the Quran? And we have there's been arguments over how you remember Allah and can you do this and do that. It's all taking people away from something which is an absolutely essential cure. Okay, can you remember Allah in a gathering? Can you do this? Can you do this? And any door that's open to you to remembrance of Allah, go through it, take it because you need it. Okay, and the Prophet ﷺ taught us all these different adhkar at different places and different times. But the essence of it is just remember Allah constantly. And again, the physical metaphor, if you're constantly in training, you're constantly fit and then when the challenges come, when the time comes, your body will respond. Okay, whether you're fighting or sport, whatever it is, your body will respond if you're in training. But likewise with the soul, if you're constantly training with dhikr, then you'll be up to the challenge when it comes. You'll be able to negotiate anything. Okay, but if you only remember Allah once in a while or not, or very little, then your heart is not healthy. So it's going to struggle when the going gets tough. It won't be able to get up the hill because you'll get out of breath. It requires practice, and dhikr is something which is constant. The more you do it, the more it has an effect. And that's why the only thing in the Quran Allah says to do a lot of. Okay, He doesn't say do a lot of salah, which is of course is dhikr in itself, but He doesn't say a lot of even charity. There's recommendation, but it's never like do a lot of it. It's the Quran. The only dhikr is called Allah dhikran kathiran. Remembering Allah and remembering the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sallu alaihi wasallam taslima. That's done a lot, but the other stuff is not necessary. It's not always, because dhikr is only the effect is felt by doing it in abundance, by doing it a lot, and then freely committing acts of disobedience. Okay, it's not all of us make mistakes. All of us commit, inshallah, only minor things, and but the danger is in how, not the act itself, but how we see it and how we respond and how we whether we feel remorse, whether we make amends or not. That's really the issue. So we almost, I think this is. So where is all this? Let's just kind of bring it back to where is this taking us to? What's the end goal in all this? This whole discussion. We should always remind ourselves. What do we want from this life? Where do we want to reach before we die? What's it all for? MashaAllah. Exactly. That's a verse I had. The tranquil soul. This is what we should long for. This is what we should aim for. This is what we should ask. We hear this khitab or this from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyatuha an-nafs al-mutma'inna. Inshallah, every one of us, inshallah, will hear this. Oh, tranquil soul, irji'i ila rabbiki. Return to your Lord, because every one of us is on this journey from separation to union with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, but how and what state are we going to return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Irji'i ila rabbiki radiyatan mardiyya. Well pleased and well pleasing. You're pleased, you're content with Allah, and Allah's content with you. So everything is in this. The rida of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the pleasure of Allah. فَادْخُلِي فِي عِبَادِي وَادْخُلِي جَنَّتِي. Be with the ones that I love. Who are the people that Allah loves? The prophets, النبيين والصديقين والشهداء والصالحين. Who are you and me to be with them? But Allah is saying you can join that group of people, the rest of all people, from each age and each time, with the Nabiyyin, the prophets, their companions, and the people who followed in their footsteps. The Siddiqeen, the people who attain this high rank of Siddiqiyah, absolute sincerity and faith. And then the Shuhada, the people who gave their lives for Allah. And then the Salihin, the people who are just upright and served Allah sincerely. So this is where we want to get to, inshallah. And it's not difficult we can't do it on our own, but the fact that we're gathering, talking about these things is always a sign that there's a desire for that. A lot of Muslims will not even ask and think about these things. They're in a good place, inshallah, obeying Allah, but there's never this thought of what's the higher, longing for something which is higher. Longing to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. Allah says, why did Allah create us? In order that we worship Him. Okay, but part of that worship, or the essence of that worshiping, is knowing Him. Do you aspire to be someone that knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And every believer has a basic knowledge of Allah. We know that He's one. We know that but there's no limit to that knowledge. There's a general knowledge that every Muslim needs to have. We study in Aqidah, but there's an experiential, direct knowledge of Allah that we should aspire to have, which is called al-ma'rifa billah. Yeah. And even the young guys here, you should aspire and ask Allah to be arif billah, to be an arif billah, someone that knows Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we don't leave this life until we be people that have a knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, beyond just a rational knowledge of Him, a direct knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's beautiful in French. The word for French in worship, the word for worship in French is adorer, adoration. Okay, they actually say, when they translate this verse in French, they say to adore. And if you're raised reading hymns like I was, and oh come, let us adore Him. Adoration is in its older English sense, we don't use it much, which is to love, basically, but to worship and to love. And that's where we want to get to as well, is to adore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have someone that you adore Allah, in other words, you worship Him and you know Him and you love Him subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He loves you. You become beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's kind of where I wanted to get to. I just wanted to get to here, actually. All the other stuff is secondary to this point. Is that what do you actually want from this? All this path and talking about the path and going on the path and traveling the path, and this is it. This is coming to know Allah, to love Allah, and to be pleasing to Allah. وَرِضْوَانٌ مِّنَ اللَّهِ أَكْبَرُ. What is greater than the pleasure of Allah? What's this life for? How long are we going to live on this? How long are we going to be here? But these are things that we should be seeking to aspire to ask for, and to attain. And Allah is the Kareem. Allah is the Wahhab. He's the generous. He's the giver. He can give all of this to us, all of us, if we sincerely ask for it and want it. And maybe we don't have to go through this long, difficult journey that perhaps the people before us went through, because we're coming to the end of times, and it's a nature that things are different. Just a small amount of sincerity, a small amount of effort, Allah will reciprocate, because there's very few people doing that, So inshallah. Yeah. It's not difficult for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So any questions or comments or reflections anyone want to share?
You mentioned about the stages of the nafs. So we all have times when we feel remorseful and reproachful. Sometimes we even have times when we have an experience of spiritual high in our lives. So is it correct to say that we can go through the stages of the nafs, and then you can be in a state where in one moment you're nafs al-lawama, and then you fall back, and then you're nafs al-amara again, and then you have an experience and you're at a stage of mutma'inna, and you can fall back again. Does that happen, or once you're at a level, you stay at that level?
I don't know, all these things, it's experiential, and there'll be different ways of looking at it. But I think we have the scholars talk about maqamat and ahwal. They talk about stations when you're like firmly established in a station. And they talk about hal, which is something which comes, you experience something, you experience an ecstasy, you experience fear, you experience joy, and then they come and go. What we're trying to, and we can't have no control over that. What we're trying to attain is a state of being solid in that, and we'll come to it in the third session a bit more about what those maqam, what those stations are. But if someone has reached a level of mutma'inna, generally there's it's unlikely you're going to fall back. If you're in that lawama, yes, there's that struggle when you're going to, and most of us are in that kind of back and forth, and it doesn't mean that the people in a higher station are not struggling, not have their own struggles, but they've reached a level where they've had a kind of victory over the lower self. The challenges are different now, but it's not it's ease. You know, there's a level of ease in terms of the kind of physical struggles. And there's the spiritual struggles are different, but so yeah, I think it's. I don't know if that really answers the question, but yeah, something along those lines. Again, it's experiential. So if you haven't, I'm not claiming I've experienced these things. I'm just quoting people who have, and that's one of the. When we read the books of the people, they've had dhawq, they've experienced these things, and they're describing them. But things are often not easy to define or describe. So sometimes you learn more in poetry. That's why, than you learn in a kind of textbook. Like Imam Ghazali is very rational, very scientific. But sometimes he'll say, well, that's all I can say about this. Now, the rest of it is beyond, you know. But when you read the poetry, like you see, Hamza does a lot. You get something of a spiritual experience that they had, and they're trying to put into words, which is very difficult. But they do it. It can be done in poetry, perhaps in a way that it can't be done in prose or done in a kind of book of instruction. Yeah. Well, anything else? Anyone? All good? Yeah.
What makes humans different from the other creations, such as angels and jinns and animals?
What makes us different?
We don't have the intellect and of jinns and superpowers like angels do. So what makes them different?
Yeah. I mean, we're very similar to jinn. Jinn have the same, you know, they have the same. Essentially, they're struggling with that, with this obedience and disobedience in the like us. They have free will, which we have. They just have it. They're just different entities in the different creation, but essentially they're going through that struggle that we're going through. Angels are creatures made of light, and they have no choice to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're just performing certain functions and serving Allah and worshipping Allah, but they don't share in that struggle that we share in. They have incredible powers and things that we don't have, but in a sense, then we're not. They're not in this. They're not on. They're not in this kind of. They don't have taklif. What we have as human beings is taklif. Is legal responsibility. We have commands and provisions that we have to follow, and they're just angels are in a state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, a state of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So what advice would you give to somebody who maybe overthinks when it comes to spirituality, or grapples with the idea of not being able to achieve perfection, wanting to do as much as you can?
I think everyone will have their different temperaments and different tendencies, and some people, even within the deen, some people will have leanings towards certain things, and like you said, some people might be very rational and have that, you know, tendency towards perfection, and you might be, like you said, overthinking things, over rationalizing. So I mean, I think just exposing yourself to Allah's mercy, basically. And one of the things we in gatherings when we gather for the remembrance of Allah, and we hear beautiful poetry or beautiful sounds or the Quran, we try and almost with that speaking to the ruh. You know, if we're all kind of the intellect's important and kind of considering everything and reflecting everything is important, but sometimes we have to almost let go and let the soul, let the spirit be nourished. I know that sounds a bit kind of abstract, but and we're not aiming for perfection. That's the thing. We're not that we should actually be always reminding ourselves of our own nothingness and brokenness. You know, we're not getting there. We're not getting there through us. I'm not getting there through me and through my efforts and my. That's part of the mean. We take the means, but the Allah is the one that's going to take us to the destination, not us. That's really important, and that gives us hope, and it gives us. Otherwise, this thing is very tough, and the next session will be it's tough stuff. It's complex. But I'm not hoping to get there through my own efforts. As long as you're aware of this struggle and these issues, and you're doing what work you can, that's inshallah enough. And we're putting our trust and our hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we're following and our biggest hope is our connection to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's the shortcut. You need to. Why do the people of Allah always talk about love of the Rasul and connecting to the Rasul, and anything that connects to the Rasul, they're always celebrating, and it's not just it's not just hot air. It's because that's the way to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you can connect to the Rasul, the more you can love the Rasul, the more you can just be engrossed in him and his everything. That's the way to. It's not through me perfecting every last step on the path. That's unlikely to happen. It's more just and how do we get one of the connections to the Rasul is through the people who are connected to the Rasul. That's why we have the idea of Sanad. That's why the chain of transmission comes in. You can't narrate a hadith unless you have a Sanad. Okay, but that applies to everything in the Deen. Is if we don't have a sound connection back, then there'll be benefit, but it won't have its full effect. So connecting to the Rasul through the chain of connection. This is the shortcut. This is the turbo, speed that gets you further than any efforts you make yourself. And it's not about again with Ramadan. It's not about. We should look at quality, not quantity. Okay, we're very fixed in this mentality. 20 the rak'ah, we do the tarawih and we do everything, and that's all beautiful. And the Pakistani, they're very strong on that, mashallah. And, it's like a fard, it's like an obligation, and I'm not knocking that. That's beautiful and do that. But at the end of the day, what does Allah want from you in the night in Ramadan or in the day in Ramadan? What's Allah want from you? He wants you to be a slave, broken for Him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even if you're just a little bit of worship and recited one verse of the Quran with presence of heart and mind, and made one sajda and cried in that might be better than all the rak'ahs. And I'm not not taking away from that. It's an amazing act of worship, but often let's not miss in the kind of haste and the kind of pressure to do what we should be doing. Let's not miss the actual where our hearts should be in all of that. And it's not an excuse to be lazy and do nothing, but it's like what have I truly done? Or where's my heart truly in all of this? وَرَحْمَتِي وَسِعَتْ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ. Allah says, my mercy has embraced everything. Just think about that for a moment. Inshallah. Good. Inshallah. Make dua, ya inshallah. Ya Allah, ya Rab, ya Rab, ya Rab, ya Rab, ya Allah, ya Kareem. يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أول الأولين يا آخر الآخرين يا ذا القوة المتين يا رحم المساكين يا أرحم الراحمين. Ask Allah, you're the most merciful, you're the most kind, you're the one that brought us to this place, you're the one that gave us all these blessings that we have, and you blessed us to access His knowledge, which was passed on to us through your messenger to us through the blessed Imams of this way. And we thank you for that blessing, inshallah. We ask Allah to live up to this knowledge and to act on this knowledge and to live by this knowledge, that we be people of absolute sincerity, not because of efforts that we make or because of who we are, but because of who you are and because of your Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That we be people of absolute ikhlas and absolute sidq and absolute sincerity and truthfulness, and that actions are truly and everything we do is pleasing to you. Our hearts that you gaze upon our hearts and cleanse them and purify them and make them beloved to you, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and make us true servants of you, true Muslimin, true Mu'mineen, true Muhsineen, true Arifeen, true Mahbubeen, that are beloved to you, and people that have absolute sincere connection to you, Ya Rabbal Alamin, that we never We heed us of you for a moment, that we become people that are absolutely beloved to you, Ya Rabbi. And move from us all the barriers and all the difficulties and all the things which take us away from you, that we be constantly in remembrance of you, in presence with you, Ya Rabbil Alameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And may Allah, that the blessings extend to the people that we love, the families and friends that we have, those who are not Muslim, amongst our families and friends and neighbors, and may Allah shine the light of guidance into their hearts, Ya Rabbil Alameen. May those who are struggling with their faith and struggling with these difficulties and these barriers, may Allah remove those barriers from them, Ya Rabbil Alameen. And all those who are suffering as we speak, immense suffering, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala relieve that suffering, but raise them to ranks that are beyond description by all the things that they've suffered, especially the people of Gaza and Sudan and other lands, Ya Rabbil Alameen, that they may taste the sweetness of connection to you and love from you, and high ranks with you, Ya Rabbil Alameen, the children and the mothers and those who are suffering, Ya Rabbil Alameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen, and replace all that they suffered physically, replace it with that something spiritual that they taste and they experience, in this life and the next, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ya Rabbil Alameen, bless our teachers and our mashayikh, these imams who've conveyed this knowledge to us, raise their ranks, and give us adab with them, and allow us to be with the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam in every situation, every state. Ya Rabbi, and we follow him, we love him, we be with him, we see him in our dreams, and we see him in a wakeful state. We see him constantly, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. We constantly, he's on our minds and on our tongues, and that we likewise, Ya Allah, that we just increase in love for him, for you, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Bless us in Sha'ban, and bless us in last to reach Ramadan the best of states, and to be the best ever Ramadan that we've come into, Ya Rabbil Alameen, that our hearts are prepared for that, and before that, the night of Laylatul Nisf in Sha'ban, which is coming up, may Allah receive the blessings of that night, and the blessing of every night and every day, that we're constantly in that state of closeness, Ya Rabbil Alameen. Ask Allah for all the good things the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam asked for, and we seek refuge in you from all the bad things he sought refuge from, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and give us victory over the nafs and the dunya and the shaitan and all the forces and all the darkness, all the things that take us away from us. Rabbil Alameen. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. تقبل منا بالسر الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين